You guys, I read so much. At one point, I felt like my brain was just going to explode. It hurt. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Let Me Learn Ya, where I, Lana McCarthy, your friendly neighborhood dietitian, shares with you all of the information she has ever learned in the entire world. This is part 2 of my intermittent fasting deep dive. If you have not watched part 1, check it out, because I talk about the history of intermittent fasting, whether or not it's a new fad. I talk about all the different types of intermittent fasting, and also how intermittent fasting affects your body from a metabolic molecular perspective. It's pretty cool, so check it out. This video is going to get into the meatiest, potatoiest parts of intermittent fasting. Specifically, what the hell does the research say? Because you have all kinds of people yelling and arguing about intermittent fasting is going to kill you. No, it's the most amazing thing ever. How dare you? You're going to ruin people's lives. No, I'm not. I'm amazing. People on YouTube and random influencers and also health professionals, and it's just all over the place, you guys. So let's hang out together. Let's have a little, get some herbal tea, maybe a little coffee, maybe a little pizza. I don't care. I don't judge. Do whatever you want. Curl up. Let's chat, because we're going to get into the research and it's going to be super cool. Now, before any of you get mad at me like, oh, you didn't talk about my favorite type of intermittent fasting, or oh, you didn't specify what type of intermittent fasting was talked about in that research. Let's get everything out on the table, folks. The types of fasting that are absolutely overwhelmingly the most researched are alternate day fasting, modified alternate day fasting, and the 5-2 diet, and then somewhat time-restricted eating. So the majority of the research that I'm going to be talking about here is going to be on the first 3 I mentioned. Just like there are certain types of intermittent fasting that have been researched over others, there are different benefits of intermittent fasting that have been overwhelmingly researched more than others. The main one is weight, BMI, body fat percentage, whether or not lean muscle mass is spared. Those have been looked at a lot. Cardiovascular metabolic markers such as cholesterol, triglycerides, blood pressure, inflammatory markers. And then lastly, insulin resistance and fasting blood glucose or fasting blood sugar. Now, I know you guys are all going to be talking about, what about the autophagy? Yeah, we're going to talk about that, but we'll explain why the research is pretty lacking there. Not going to be able to get into super duper specifics in this video, or else it would be a million miles long. If anybody wants to make a documentary about intermittent fasting and you want me to get into the details, call me up. I'm ready for a right price, okay? So know that I'm going to be talking about trends and using a lot of terms like generally we see such and such, and know that you may find a study or you might find a couple studies that contradict what I'm saying. But this is what we're seeing overall. Cool. Are we ready? Let's go. Okay, so let's talk about weight first, because that's what everybody cares about, apparently. Not all the cool stuff. Whatever. So what does the trend say? What does the trend say? Brenda, what does the trend say? This is what I found. In general, with various types of fasting methods, 4 to 10% of body weight was lost when performing some type of fasting regimen within a time period of 4 to 24 weeks. Intermittent fasting, which I'm going to use as the umbrella term to fit all the types of intermittent fasting that I talked about in part 1. Again, go see it if you didn't watch it. Has not been found to be superior with regards to weight loss to continuous energy restriction. However, There have been multiple, I believe 4, systematic reviews and meta-analyses that were graded moderate evidence quality that did show specifically that modified alternate day fasting was found to be superior with regards to weight loss, body fat percentage, etc. It was also associated with more fat mass, like body fat lost, when compared to continuous energy restriction. So that's kind of interesting. Modified alternate day fasting and the 5-2 diet were the only intermittent fasting types consistently to be found to result in significant weight loss. So that all sounds pretty cool, but keep this in mind. What does the long-term data say? We know that people can restrict food for short periods of time and that they can lose weight, but is it sustainable? Do they do it long-term? Do they keep the weight off? And this is what's been observed so far with intermittent fasting, which I found very interesting. It was observed that participants were the most successful at losing weight with intermittent fasting during the first 1 to 6 months. This is what I always say, around month 3 to month 6 is when people generally hit a weight loss plateau. This can either happen because people are getting fatigued doing the diet and they don't follow it as well, or it could be that metabolically their body starts hunkering down and saying, you're not taking any more of my fat, copper. I'm holding on to this. What about lean muscle? In hypocaloric diets, we're talking reducing your calories from like 40, 50, 60%, yada, yada. It has been observed that anywhere from 10 to 60% of weight lost in participants is actually lean muscle, which you don't want that to happen, right? Lean muscle is metabolically active. There's all kinds of health benefits from having muscle that I can't get into here. One of the big things that proponents of intermittent fasting say is that intermittent fasting, because you're not continuously depriving yourself of calories, your body never dips into your skeletal muscle to use it as energy. Therefore, it has a protein sparing effect. But what does the research say? It says, hey, I have no idea. That's what it says. I would read a study where it was like, nope, totally spared. The next one was like, nope, dropped just the same as restricting calories on a daily basis. The next one, opposite. Another one, no change. It was all stinking over the place. And the majority of the studies that I found specifically looking at lean mass were super short, like 4 to 8 weeks. Not cool, you guys. Additionally, a lot of those studies did not compare the intermittent fasting method to a control or somebody doing a continuous energy restricted diet. In the studies that reported some sort of sparing, what they did see was that loss of lean muscle mass was slightly better than continuous. We're going to call it continuous energy restriction, or CER. We're just calling it CER. I'm sick of saying it. But what was kind of interesting, and this supports what's been seen with CER diets. So it has been observed in some studies in very hypocaloric diets that if you increase the amount of protein and maybe do some physical activity like resistance training, that lean mass may be spared. And in some of these studies, they did experiment with that, and they did observe that either lean mass did not go down or it went down less than when compared to CER without protein or an intermittent fasting diet without extra protein. What about cardiovascular heart stuff? Because I just spit everywhere. Because we're all having heart problems, right? These markers measured cholesterol, blood pressure. The results were probably the most consistent. They were still kind of somewhat all over the place, but they were pretty consistent. The majority of human studies have shown significant reductions in systolic blood pressure, as well as a significant drop in diastolic blood pressure. Reductions in total cholesterol were pretty consistent, ranging from a 6 to 21% drop, depending on amount of time that they were fasting and type of fasting. Fasting triglycerides also were observed to drop. LDL cholesterol was also observed to drop. However, in the majority of the studies, HDL was not affected at all, not raising, not dropping. Here's the rub, if you will. It is unclear in all of these studies if these drops and these improvements are happening because of fasting itself or because the participants dropped weight. Because all of these benefits were also seen in individuals who were following CER and lost weight. But here's what was kind of interesting. When they looked at some of the participants post their fasting experience, the enhanced lipid oxidation, so the breaking down of fats and using them as energy, and ketogenesis that was induced during the fasting period remained somewhat active after these individuals stopped fasting, which resulted in improved postprandial, after you eat, lipid metabolism. So that was kind of interesting. Again, we're getting back into the inconsistent findings, okay? Probably not as bad as the lean muscle stuff, but pretty inconsistent. One possible explanation for the inconsistency is that many of these studies were conducted in metabolically healthy people with overweight or obesity, and that the ones that generally saw improvement were conducted in metabolically unhealthy individuals with overweight or obesity. There was a 2019 review and meta-analysis that came to the conclusion that fasting glucose and HOMA-IR were significantly reduced after some sort of intermittent fasting program. Additionally, there was another meta-analysis that was graded moderate quality, which showed that the 5-2 diet, when followed 3 to 6 months in women with overweight or obesity, resulted in a significant reduction of fasting glucose when compared to CER. One of the things that all the science bros and all the fitness bros love to talk about with regards to intermittent fasting is autophagy. What is autophagy? It literally means self-eating. Pretty cool. You're a little cannibal eating yourself. Yeah, your body's doing that. I'm probably autophagizing because I haven't eaten. Autophagy is an essential cellular process that's the lysosomal degradation and recycling of all types of intracellular components, including proteins, organelles, or even pathogens that reach the cytoplasm. What the fork does that mean? What it means is that your body takes parts of your cells, possibly viruses, possibly bacteria, all kinds of crap. Things where your body's like, nope, we don't need that. That's not working. That's old and needs to be replaced. And it breaks them down. It just degrades them and repurposes those parts to build other things and do other things in your body, or it just gets rid of them. It's like, who cares? This process is tightly linked to cellular quality control. Now, this all sounds awesome. You're like, oh my God, I want to do that nonstop. That is so cool. Well, just keep in mind that like everything in the human body and in nature or whatever, if you do something in excess, it's bad. Long-term or overly activated autophagy can lead to all kinds of horrible things happening in your body, including cell death and disease and what have you. Just like the opposite of not having it at all can lead to the same thing. Autophagy in itself is such a big frickin' topic that I can't really talk a lot about it here, and it doesn't make sense to me to really focus on it here because of the fact that the research is so limited in regards to humans. There are lots of animal studies, studies in yeasts and different types of living things that are non-human that support intermittent fasting or some sort of caloric restriction to all kinds of health benefits. What do we know about autophagy outside of the human studies? We know that something called mTOR is a protein complex that is totes magrotes involved in autophagy. It senses energy, nutrients, stress, hormones in the cell and yells at people to do stuff based on what it's sensing and yells at people not to do stuff. It is upregulated in the presence of food, meaning it's more active, specifically when carbohydrates and protein are there. And when it is activated, it upregulates everything that has to do with storage, glucose oxidation, using that energy you got from food to build more cells, build more protein, store the extra stuff, store. And it yells at everybody to stop doing the opposite. So it puts a halt on autophagy. mTOR hyperactivation, like being on all the time, is linked to various types of chronic diseases, cardiovascular disease, inflammatory conditions, autoimmune disease, aging, and cancer, which is kind of why people are thinking, well, mTOR is turned on by food. If you are constantly eating, it is always turned on, which means your body is always in growth and storage mode. If you shift it out of that to where you're fasting and you're depriving mTOR of carbohydrates and protein, its activity is reduced. There have been a couple small, like tiny studies conducted, which did have some interesting information come out of it, but it's not enough to be like, yep, this is the case, because there could be another study that says, no, this didn't happen. mTOR activity was observed to decrease by 40% in fasted individuals. And downstream targets of mTOR, remember I was telling you how it tells people to do things? Their activity was also significantly decreased. It's also been observed in some studies that during CER, that genes that play a role in autophagy are upregulated. So again, there's signs that this stuff is happening, but nothing definitive. We haven't seen a trend yet. But what if the participants reported in all of this? Don't you want to hear from them? Because this is just, oh, here's what's going on. But what's their experience? Positive first. There are many people who reported that they found doing an intermittent fasting protocol a lot easier to follow for a couple of reasons. Number one, no food technically is off limits. They can eat out at restaurants with friends and family if it's a day that they aren't fasting. They can eat potatoes, they can eat cake, they can eat bread, they can eat whatever they want. It's just that they're limiting when they eat those foods. Other people reported that it was a lot easier for them to feel hungry knowing that that hunger was short-lived, instead of feeling somewhat hungry all the time throughout the day when they were doing CER. Some people reported actually feeling relief that for certain periods of the day or certain days, they didn't have to think about food at all. They didn't have to think about planning, shopping, prepping, when they were going to eat, how they were going to eat. And some people reported feeling actually less hunger. One of the fears of researchers, health professionals with intermittent fasting is that people will overeat and gorge on the days that they are allowed to eat whatever they want. But something has been observed that's been termed carryover effect. And what carryover effect, son? Sorry, I watch way too much Supernatural. When participants were allowed to eat whatever they wanted the next day, they actually did not eat as much and maintained their caloric deficit throughout the entire week. The negative reports that people have shared from fasting is hunger is a big one, feeling a more severe type of hunger than when they're just doing caloric restriction. Energy restrictive diets in general have been linked to fatigue, brain fog, irritability, concentration difficulties, mood disorders, preoccupation with food, and intermittent fasting is not different from those. The pros of intermittent fasting is that at its worst, it's equal to CER with regards to weight loss. And there have been numerous studies that have actually shown that intermittent fasting, specifically modified alternate day fasting, may be superior at fat percentage lost, weight lost, and reduced BMI when compared to CER. It clearly promotes beneficial metabolic changes, but we don't really know if it's because of weight loss, but the weight loss is happening. So either way you cut it, it's leading to benefits. Though this trend is a little bit more consistent and we need to verify if it only happens in metabolically unhealthy individuals, it has been observed to reduce fasting glucose and improve insulin sensitivity. For some people, intermittent fasting may be easier to follow because you don't have to worry about what foods are allowed and what's not allowed. You can eat out with your friends, nothing's off limits as long as you plan your feeding and fasting days accordingly. The cons in speaking about the research is there are no long-term studies. There were a couple studies that lasted up until 12 months. But the problem is that when we look at people who have done restrictive calorie diets or restrictive diets in removing entire food groups, is that when we follow up with them over a year, 2 years, and even 3 years, we see that that weight just comes back. So there's no way of us knowing if that weight loss that happens with intermittent fasting is sustainable. And then the other issue is that we're starting to see little hints that maybe the health benefits that you see from intermittent fasting are short term as your body readjusts to what you're doing and figures out, oh, they're trying to trick us, huh? Well, we'll show them, see? We're not going to know any of this stuff until we have more long-term studies, and we just don't have that with intermittent fasting. So that's a con. Another issue is that intermittent fasting may have different effects on women. Some reports that we're looking at fasting during the holy month of Ramadan, for instance, which is basically time-restricted eating, found that post-Ramadan, women's resting energy expenditure was reduced significantly when men's were not. What does that mean? It means that the amount of calories that those women needed to survive, just breathe and have their heart pump and all that, dropped. So that if they continued to eat what they were eating before to maintain, they would now possibly gain weight. There have also been concerns that restricting calories may promote menstrual abnormalities. So again, this is why it's sad that we don't have long-term studies looking at this stuff, because we don't know. Dropout rate also, what we normally call adherence, how likely are people to follow this diet, how easy is it to follow, are just as all over the place as the stinking lean mass research. Why am I doing this? Am I a Muppet? Sometimes the dropout was found to be lower than CER. Other times it was found to be equal. Other times it was found to be higher. So I think it depends on the individual, but we need more research on that. We just don't know. Shrugs. So now the really cool things that we talked about, metabolic adaptations, autophagy, we just absolutely don't know. There have been maybe a couple human studies that I could find looking at this, but overall, all of the research regarding autophagy and, metabolic adaptations are in animals. There needs to be more research looking at that instead of the weight loss. I think they need to push the weight loss to the side because, in my opinion, that's not as important as, are there metabolic adaptations happening in the body that are beneficial and long-term? I wish I could give you guys more definitive answers, but if I did, I wouldn't be saying the truth. So I'm sorry if you came here looking for answers and you kind of feel more confused than you were before, but that's how research works, you guys. It's good. We're researching it. We're looking into it. We definitely need more research, which is usually the case with everything. If you've had any experience with intermittent fasting or know somebody or have thoughts on it, definitely share your comments below. I would love to hear from you. And if there's any other topic that you would like for me to discuss, definitely let me know as well. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Let's get this over with. I'm just kidding. I love doing this. I love it. I love it, you guys. Oh my God, I love it. I hope I can do this for the rest of my life, because clearly I can't sing. That's how Muppet stands. The homeostasis